Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. I'm very excited for our conversation with my colleague and friend Kara about kind of ethical AI. There's many different ways we can take it. We're going to say mostly in kind of the enterprise ethics of AI, but definitely a fun conversation to really understand what does it look like to not only implement AI, but to use it well. And I'm really excited for Kara to come and join us today. So if you haven't been on ByteSized before, this is my podcast and live stream where I invite some of my industry colleagues and we talk about what's actually going on in businesses with technology as opposed to hype tactics. So this has been kind of long time coming. Kara and I met on TikTok. So if you don't follow me over there, I invite you to kind of come join that fun community that I met a lot of our bite-sized guests on. But I'll let
would
Kara
also
do.
say, I would also say, definitely follow Kyla on TikTok because I had a whole group of developers say, make sure you tell Kyla that we love her. so,
Oh,
so
oh my
yeah,
gosh.
you've got a fan club in Australia.
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I am beyond honored. I don't even know like what to say to that. Really, I'm just lucky that you guys, even want to watch me, but most importantly that we're talking about these things that have always been kind of this underbelly of big software, starting to see the rise of like what does it mean to actually do good business and what does the client or the business really have as far as rights when it comes to ethics and integrity based on their technology strategies. So, Kara, if you wouldn't mind giving us a quick intro and telling us a little bit more about Ethic AI.
Cool. So I'm Kara. I'm a co-founder of Ethic AI. Me and my business partner, Catrielle, started Ethic AI very recently, actually, towards the beginning of the year is when we started. That kind of ramped full up by July because there was a big kind of gap in the market that
Mhm.
we found that people, particularly, workers, people were quite concerned about how it was being implemented. And that is a really important element of any change transformation piece is to
Mhm.
make sure that you have the trust of the people that are working, that you have an understanding and insight into what their day to day looks like in a meaningful way. And if you're not creating this architecture for trust and
Mhm.
that they believe that there is an ethical underpinning to the implementation for AI
Mhm.
inside a change transformation piece, then it won't succeed. It won't succeed.
Mhm.
So, so we started early off in the beginning of the year, but I come from operations, being COO, being executive director of operations at a number of large digital agencies in Australia, working with really sort of enterprise level clients as part of that, and just really started to feel like there was a gap in this part of the conversation.
Mhm.
There's a lot of conversations that happen with ethics with universities.
Mhm.
There's like academia that goes into AI
Mhm.
ethics, but putting it into practice inside organizations, that's where we just saw that there wasn't many people inside that space. We have been at it since the beginning of the year and loving every minute of it, actually. We too are on TikTok and love the platform to be able to have really kind of deep and meaningful conversations regarding AI ethics with people from all over the world.
Yeah, and it's such a global kind of, no, I wouldn't say problem, but challenge right now, right? Is how does that actually look in all different parts of the world and all different businesses that practice, whether they're a large global complex organization or they're a smaller SMB regionally, and there's so much conversation. I love how you say like there's such a gap between theory and actual practice and execution, and that's really what matters, right? We could talk all
Mm.
day about AI policy, the theories around it, what it should look like. But if we're not seeing what it looks like in practice, that is really a huge issue. So, how would you say define ethical AI and can maybe give us some idea of what it might look like in practice?
Yeah, cool. So I think that what I always sort of start with is in terms of ethical AI, we need to create a distinction between
Mhm.
ethics and morals. Because oftentimes we get conversations of people going, "Oh, how can you have ethical AI? Everyone feels different things. Everyone's in a different way." Like, but morals are personal and they reflect how each one of us feels about right and wrong. But ethics are a collective, and it's how we sort of build frameworks as a society to build and guide what's good for the collective group.
Mhm.
So when we go through that process, a lot of people are conflating the two, and so it
Yes.
gets a bit murky. But when you think about it historically, every major technology rollout has gone through this process. And I'm
Oh,
talking
yeah.
about, like, for example, for cars, they were introduced. We had, like, there was obviously a whole heap of deaths on non-existent roads at the time. So we built those systems. We built road rules. We built, traffic lights. We built seat belts. All those things. So it didn't make the risk go away, but it creates a more effective
Mhm.
infrastructure to be able to roll out that change. And so, what ethical AI should look like is very much intentional design that amplifies human capability, and it doesn't erode agency, and it drives accountability and equity. And
Mhm.
so, for us, we look at it through three lenses. So, the first one is human first design.
Mhm.
So AI should be elevating the human experience, not only as a worker, but obviously consumer. Like, how are we
Mhm.
actually creating more human first experiences as part of that? Then we go into long-term sustainability. And this is an interesting one because I think a lot of people, as soon as they think sustainability, it's environmental. And environmental is a part of that.
Yeah.
But it's also social fabric, it's also community
Yes.
systems, but it's
Yeah.
also the sustainability of an organization.
Mhm.
Lots of times, like, decisions are getting made very much on a short term kind of sort of remit, and we are trying to embed AI in a way that makes sure that organizations are sustainable for as long as possible. And
Yeah.
then the third is psychosocial safety. Um, and, like, people need a level of control about what tools are shaping the world that they live in. So,
Mhm.
it's not about, like, living in compliance checklists. It's not like, and I very much am clear to step away from that kind of, you said it before. It's kind of very dry
Yes.
ethics by document kind of thing. It's not corporate checkboxes. It's actually how we are embedding applied ethics, and creating cultures of reflection inside organizations, and not creating interruption, but it's more about, like, these are the most important things for organizations to consider, and organizations just haven't trained that muscle yet.
So let me ask you, this is so interesting. So is the ethics for AI different and unique to each organization?
It would depend. Like, I think it depends on what the risk tolerance is for that organization and what level of information they've got, or, but yeah, like, I would absolutely think
Yeah,
that it's the
that's such a
frameworks and
great.
implementation, and
Yeah.
it might vary slightly per different threshold for that organization. We've worked with government bodies that have,
Yeah.
you know, highly confidential information,
Mhm.
that obviously you don't want to have that. Then you've got organizations that are just, doing like bricks and mortar. So there's not
Yes.
that much. So the sort of frameworks that you need to think about, there'll be different questions for different scenarios that you need to contain, that you need to kind of contest with. The skill for the workforce, and particularly for leadership, is being able to sit and ask the right questions inside that
Right.
space.
Right. Right. And I think that is such a healthy way to look at it because then it so heavily focuses on that need to assess and really talk to your whether it's your end users or the people involved in these types of transformational projects so you can discover what is your own collective ethics
Mm,
idea or mission in that type of piece. So I think that
yeah.
methodology is so incredibly healthy. um,
Yeah, and I think, it, like, obviously there's things that happen at a governance level, like a
Mhm.
government
Sure.
level and policy level. Obviously, those are still things to that you have to incorporate as part of that. But in terms of the ethics of an organization, and what are your ethics that you live by, what those what how they get embedded in your day to day, that those will vary. Obviously, depending upon what is the end that you're trying to generate.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's so critical to understand the distinction between those things. So I know I just like jumped into it and completely forgot about you, the
No,
audience. So I'm so sorry. I see all of these great questions coming in. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so excited, to continue to kind of bring this along. So let's get to some of them since, I ghosted you guys a little bit there. I was just so excited to talk to her about like her outlook, but let's get to this one. Why do you think there is such a gap between theory and actual execution? And even on that level, I'd love to know, like, why do you think there's a gap in just level of understanding how to execute AI implementation as well?
okay, so probably I'll go down one specific sort of use case, which is inside enterprise scale
Mhm.
organizations. One, like it's a muscle that people aren't flexing. Like
Uh-huh.
the sort of value inside leadership and organizational strength has been about decisive decision making. How do you actually drive through short term results for output, like immediate kind of results. And so the muscles for implementing ethical AI come from a different space. It's actually being inside very ambiguous conditions. Like it's a really interesting thing. Like we do workshops with people and organizations to embed sort of the critical thinking, defensible decisions as part of that. And it's
Mhm.
like, one of the hardest things that we have as part of that is that we'll put up a question, and everyone, particularly C-suite people, will always go to try and figure out the result. Just
Mhm.
like, no, cool, this is the, and we're like, no, no. The point of this exercise is to sit and then to think of all the possible outcomes.
Mhm.
And so my gut feeling is that the skills that have lived inside corporate and organizational design for some time haven't really been driving that real consideration. I think that like maybe delivery practitioners have maybe a bit
Mhm.
more concept of, because they a lot inside risk analysis and
Mhm.
that type of space, and it's like presenting all those problems. But leadership in particular, and this is what we're seeing, with poorly executed AI implementation, and they're just like, okay, cool, we're going to get rid of a whole heap of people and
Mhm.
roll this out for margin savings or cost relief. And it's
Yeah,
like it's just too short term. Um, and they're not thinking about, okay, what does this world look like when everyone has access to the same level of tech?
exactly. Yeah.
Because I think, like, and we're seeing this with the, and look, maybe I'm going a bit of a tangent, but we're seeing
No.
this with the
Nope.
rollout of AI slop. Like if everyone has access to the same tools, then it's a great leveler because you're not going in and being like, yes, my 13th email of the day that's generated and customized for me. Like there's no cut through. So
Mhm.
in terms of being able to embed ethics into that place, like it needs capacity, it needs space to breathe.
Mhm.
And I don't think that that's the natural space that a lot of organizations and corporations have been incentivized for a really long time.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I think, to that point, there's a level of understanding in the way the executive team doesn't have the same capacity or literacy to know on that side exactly what they're asking. They know, right, that shareholder pressure, that board pressure, that we have to use AI because that's what people are asking us for, but they don't understand any sort of actual or fundamental use case in their
Yeah,
organization. So they are do what they're most used to doing, going to their technology team and be like, "Hey, can you figure this out?" But it's
yeah.
like, figure what
What?
out?
Yeah,
Right?
and 100%. And this is the thing that drives me bonkers. The teams they're usually engaged to talk about AI, because people see it as like and I think this is sort of limiting over time, but it's like, oh, a magical box, we don't know what to do,
I know.
so let's throw it to the tech team. Like,
Yeah.
let's the tech team will be able to solve it. And to tell you quite honestly, CIOs, CTOs have been the most difficult people to
Mhm.
bring on board with this change, because their muscle memory is very different to
Yes.
what AI needs to implement. And so where we've seen the like most movement inside that space is CEOs and chief people officers.
Mhm.
The HR team are embedding it as part of a organizational design strategy rather than as a tech implementation. Otherwise, it just gets sold as a tool. And then you're not getting the impact. Like, and we're seeing this coming through on the MIT reports in
Mhm.
enterprise. implementation. 95% of enterprise level, obviously it was a small cohort, but 95% of enterprise level AI implementations aren't having an effect. And I think that's because it gets looked at as a tool rather than as a change framework that needs to be implemented.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you bring up kind of that the HR analogy in with AI, because the human resources department is a technology department at this point, and that's been a huge transition for them, right? I was lecturing today at one of our local universities about HR tech, and they see it still as this like just appendage to what they do, and it's like, well, this is full baked into what
Yeah,
you do. And I think that's where just saying go do AI, it's like, okay, well, that's like saying, go do a massive culture change, right? No
yeah,
one department can really deploy that. So
yeah.
it's a huge, huge piece.
And, and and this is going to become more important as we start looking at
Mhm.
AI agents, and how we break down capabilities inside organizations and how agents are deployed for specific work. And that's typically that's the kind of area that we mill in is like, okay, if we're looking at AI augmentation inside a workforce, how do we make sure that it's human first,
Yeah.
that it's long-term sustainable, and that it enables psychological safety as part of its implementation? So working with cross-disciplinary teams, leadership teams as part of that process to embed the technology, but also make sure that the team feels empowered by that process.
Absolutely. And it's incredible the amount of people that are missing on that, right? By even well-intentioned executives I talk to all the time. My team is so excited about this tool. They can't wait. They've been asking me for AI. And it's like, have they? Have they? That like, how do
Mm,
you know that at that level? And then when they go to implement it, it's a complete shock that nobody's using it. And it's like, okay, right. But did you actually ask them what they needed?
we
As
did,
far as
yeah,
that agent, right? It's great that they're clearing help desk tickets by 30% faster, right? But are they actually servicing the team, or are they just
yeah.
moving to a different way of working because they don't want to deal with the chatbot type of thing? So,
And this is like a really interesting part that it becomes like, what is the intention of the human element inside
mhm,
the exchange, right? Like when like as you said, if everything becomes like an AI tool, like it really takes away what the human experience is as part of their
mhm,
interaction with your organization. So, in terms of like setting up ways, like I find it really funny that a lot of people look to customer service as their first port of call to like remove, like to automate. It's
yeah,
like, that's your point of call with your customers. Why
yeah,
would you automate that part? That's the like, get rid of the Excel spreadsheets or the stuff in the
mhm,
back end that isn't working properly, or that takes a lot of time, or just isn't inspiring work,
mhm,
right? Like sometimes it's just not fun work to do, and it's just the things that make the business tick on. The things that you need to really lean into is that human element. How are you making sure that you're introducing conversation and back and
mhm.
forth and getting feedback, and lean into those elements. And I think that that's the part that I find so interesting about like ethical AI implementation and being human first, is like, we don't ever go into organizations to cut headcount. That's
No.
not how, like, if someone's doing that and there's like a business sustainability issue, deal with that. If there's a performance issue, deal with that. We're not going to say that it's AI as part of that extension. That's just not how we operate. So we go, okay, what are the elements of your business that can be automated? Well, let's create plans
Mhm,
to automate those things. They're not inspiring to your workforce. They're not driving your organization forward. Let's
mhm,
automate those. Then there can be parts that are augmented between the two disciplines. So you got, okay, cool. This research piece is going to be better by utilizing AI, an AI infrastructure for this research piece. Cool, do it. But then, what are the distinctly human skills?
mhm.
And you do a capability uplift with the workforce, and identify what are the human first skills that you need to lean into. And oftentimes, as I said, that's a new journey for a lot of places,
Yes.
and it requires deep business strategy as part of that.
Mhm. I love this say deep business strategy when you were talking about, that intentional design, right? That's one thing I really feel as though is something that is often missed because of the lack of, one, understanding, and two, just slowing down to remember why you're actually doing this. And that's where we're not doing, the most expensive pieces of these type of projects, which is those redesign, re-implement, reworkflow, because we didn't, figure out what we were doing in the first place. Which I
Yeah.
think is, yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
No,
No, no.
what I was just going to say, no, absolutely. But I think the thing is that people often mistake technical architecture for the change. And it's like, no, how do you actually adopt a thoughtful and considered culture
Exactly.
as part
Yeah.
of that? And that is hard, but it's possible. Like, business organizations do it all the time. And typically, where we see it have the most impact is with a, cohort of like really impassioned servant leaders that are really
Mhm.
working for the best outcome. Like you can see the same features that were still great features of leadership 15 years ago, like that they always are the differentiators of good leadership. What makes it different is now just the ability to have this skill set to really regard different facets of a more complex work with the introduction of AI.
Absolutely. And that's so well said, in that idea of just meeting people where they are, or that it's always, amazing to me, the people that want to just skip over that current state assessment because they're so focused on get them AI, get them AI. And even if they are so well intentioned, they have to still understand what they're saying and what it's perceived as, which would be one of my biggest learnings, certainly while going through implementing AI ethically. Do you remember why you're doing it? Right? It's for the service of the end users. But I'm curious to see, like, even if you wanted to share maybe some like red flags that you might be going towards the red in, an ethical implementation. Like, what are some things you're seeing that you're kind of like, we're really going to need to take a look at that when you're talking and having these conversations?
Yeah. Well, the first one, as I said, a big red flag to us is always that, okay, is this being just purely a technology department
Mhm.
implementation? That just tells us a level of sophistication. And like, look, as I said, we still obviously have conversations with those types of clients, but if they're unwilling to see that this is a larger piece, and that's when we're like, you're not seeing the forest through the
Mhm.
trees here. You really need to be thinking of this more holistically. Because otherwise it's just like, we don't want to be developing stuff that's going to be ineffectual and
Mhm.
or that's not set up, and then have things that like people at the end, workers who are disempowered by that process or that
Yes.
feel like they haven't been listened to. um, what I find really interesting, because part of our methodology is always getting doing one-to-one stakeholder interviews, getting wide research, doing psychological safety workshops with teams. And the main reason, like, if it's a red flag, is if the leadership team is hesitant
Mhm.
to take on or get feedback from people, right? Like,
Right.
if they're like, oh, it's not going to be the most valuable thing. We just need to we just need to do this element. That will be enough. Um, because it's often, people are spending so much money inside these tech stacks. And
Yes.
often they already have architecture
Oh, yeah.
inside their current tech stack that you can leverage. But it's actually the process and
Mhm.
looking at where it's going to be valuable and how that is valuable to your team. And so, yeah, as part of that process is like, okay, is it looking at a new shiny tool that you're wanting to use, or is it actually like for the end user and impact on that end? But
Absolutely.
otherwise, like, as I said, it is always an interesting conversation if you've also got a really undiverse leadership team as well. Because I think that this is also an extension of AI ethics and ensuring inclusion. Um, the more you have robust conversations at a leadership level to take on different perspectives, and when I say inclusion, like, I'm not just talking about like race, gender
Oh,
diversity,
sure.
religious diversity. It's like also diversity of thought, right?
Mhm.
It's also like having people that just think different ways and can have
Mhm.
constructive um, and critical, friction as part of that process. um, that's a really important part of that sort of taking steps to make sure that it's successful is
Mhm.
people being willing to also admit when they're wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Ego really plays a massive part of this. Like,
I couldn't agree more. That is so
um,
true.
the amount of times that I'm like people and look and I always sort of come into talking with clients and I'm like, I realize that you wouldn't have a depth of experience inside AI. So I'm not trying to do a gotcha moment to try and
Yeah.
prove that, like, not like so many leaders, they've been busy building their careers inside
Mhm.
their
Mhm.
inside their expertise, CIOs and CTOs as well, right?
Mhm.
And then AI's come in and everyone's expecting everyone to be an expert,
Yeah, exactly.
particularly so leadership. Everyone's kind of looking to leadership to be like, okay, you've got all the answers. But it's the wrong question, right? Like it's like, no, we've all got to be coming together and working collaboratively to embed and work in this space. And so it's really empowering, innately it changes the structure of an organization,
Mhm.
which is why we see so much success inside small to medium
Yes.
enterprise and
Yeah.
such limited success inside large enterprise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, along those lines, I feel like with these AI levels of tool sets, it's almost like this balance of like use some, but not too many in
Mm.
that level of a larger, bigger enterprise because they're still unsure of the risk behind that, specifically on the Gen AI side, right? Like know what ChatGPT is, but by all means, don't open it up here, right? And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel like the employees are like,
Yeah,
wait, like
100%.
what am I supposed I thought I was supposed to be like half robot, but then I have to remember like, the people side. And we're just asking a lot of a very mixed generation too. I would be curious your thoughts on this, but I don't know that we've ever had such a polarizing generation of workforce where we have, our boomers and Gen Xers who might have grown up with a computer in the
Mm,
household, but likely, not something that everybody had one. And then we have our Gen Z, which obviously knows and is very literate in technology because it's been part of their lives for their entire existence. And I can only imagine on like your work, that must be really difficult to kind of convince leadership. Like you've got a very diverse workforce in here. So we need to put
mm.
together a program that meets kind of everybody where they are?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, right? Because um, yes, whilst there'll be different technical capabilities inside an organization, um, it breaks down in different ways because oftentimes, and this is part of that organizational design and looking at capabilities rather than looking at roles.
Mhm.
And like, what are the capabilities that need to be developed and how you structure those? Because to tell you the truth, the boomers and the Gen Xers, and sometimes like they've got the experience and the taste to be able
Yeah.
to be like, that's wrong. That's wrong.
Yeah.
So their judgment level is higher. So
Yeah.
when we've been working in organizations, we find that sometimes the people that are most advantaged by AI are those people that have probably been more reticent to take it on, probably more sort of thinking that it's a scary sort of thing to take on. And then at the same time, like with Gen Z and what's coming with Alpha, like yeah, they're digital natives, absolutely, and so they're able to like get in and like look at agentic workflows and be able to implement those things. But how do we work collaboratively to ensure
Exactly.
that both facets are contained? Um, and so. Like, look, it does come up in conversation as part of that. Like, yeah, you've got to do different things, but also there's a lot of people that go, oh yeah, I'm like, you may know the tech, but how that tech is applied inside your organization,
Mhm.
that's what, like, no one knows that. Like,
Yeah.
they're trying to figure out how, like, okay, cool, I know how to use ChatGPT, and totally agree. Actually, that's one of the other sort of red flags is when you see just real risk aversion
Yeah.
to implementation. One of the things that like we do as part of our onboard is we do just scenario testing, right?
Yeah.
Like on a thermometer scale,
Mhm.
how hot is this inside your business? And we
Mhm.
kind of go through processes where we scale. And there's been times where we've seen people like every level, they're like 9, 10, like it's peaking out max risk at very low kind of games. And that tells us that there's a culture of like a lack of just a lack of resilience, a lack of ability to kind of gauge what real risk is.
Mhm.
And so we have to also do a bit of baseline setting there to ensure that people also go, okay, what is the outcome? What if something goes wrong? And this is where you do these comparable positions regarding AI ethics. And it's the train cart problem. Like if you go one way and you intervene and you go the other way, it's like,
Mhm.
is what you're doing as part of this decision making process reducing the risk? And if there was a tolerance of of risk inside the human intervention,
Mhm.
like, are you weighing that against it? Because
Exactly.
sometimes people are like AI systems, oh, how would we ever deal if there was like a data breach or something like that? And obviously you never want a data breach. I'm not suggesting that for a second. But guess what? There's been data breaches without AI.
Yeah,
Like, there's also been
exactly.
like how your business is organized around dealing with those problems
Mhm.
is the important thing. Yeah. So how, like, it's more assessing the weighting between human impact and what AI impact would be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And really knowing that you can measure those, right? They are measurable and they are a KPI that you should be looking at. Just things like you can measure trust through attrition in the organization, through satisfaction surveys, all of those different things. And that's why I think a lot of times those phase 0, 1, whatever you want to call for the project is often overlooked because people are like, well, how are we supposed to know? It's like, well, ask them, survey them from an
Yeah.
outside autonomous third party, not from their manager being like, do you like it here? No, that obviously you're not going to get good data around that. But to be able
Yeah.
to know the sentiment of the organization before you're implementing. I mean, some of my favorite meetings to sit in on are readouts on those readiness assessments when it comes to new technology. And the executive team, again, even if they're incredibly well intentioned, hey, we're trying to modernize our architecture, we're trying to give our team the tools that they need, are absolutely shocked when they see that some people don't think that they can get this done because in 1992 they tried to implement, an ERP system and it went off the rails and they're like, "Oh
Yeah.
my god, that was 20 years ago."
It's
It's like, well, it still obviously, affects them in that way, and you need to be able to know those things before you spent all this money on this new tool that's now a subscription tool, so you're paying for it no matter what, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and
yeah.
then all of a sudden we're, wasting all of this money because we're not utilizing the tool, and we don't
Mm.
even know we're not utilizing the tool. That's kind of lost in the ranks there too. So I think that that's so critical to really understand where your organization is at.
And it's also making metrics, and we always call them measures of success. Like, I think that the whole like KPI jargon or even
Mhm.
OKRs, it's like,
Yeah.
what does success look like?
Mhm.
And because when you break it down into KPIs or OKRs, and I actually really do like OKR. Just to be clear, I'm not a massive fan of like KPI and like just gaming the system to be
Yeah.
able to be successful. But if you have something that like is the language of what is successful for our organization,
Yeah.
and more often than not, like, it's been very enlightening going into organizations and be like, what is success to your
Yeah.
organization? And it's like, oh, I only know what my KPI is for like,
Yeah.
the
I don't
next
know.
quarter, maybe 6 months. Yeah, I don't know. Like, what does that mean? Like, to what
Yeah.
end does success mean success for you? And when can you take a moment also when that success is met to celebrate, and
Great.
galvanize a
Yeah.
cultural moment around the success of the team. And that's what I think is such an important part of this change management process, is creating these environments and cultures that are reflective and create opportunity that people can really engage meaningfully with their work, rather than just churn out work. So yeah.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. So in your opinion, can AI help with that feedback loop, with shifting that culture? And is that a good way or, a kind of scary way to look at it?
Absolutely. Like, for me, I like what I actually really love to do
Mhm.
is, and I'm a senior operator inside
Mhm. Yeah.
inside business operations. So I feel like it also comes maybe a bit easier to me. But I've also got lots of people that I've worked with that don't have that
Yeah.
experience set. Um, so, it's like, how do you shape those? But where I love using AI in terms of like shaping, it's like, use it as a critique, like use it
Mhm.
as this kind of put yourself in opposition to something and be like, you want to have the exact opposite position to where I'm coming from, and then look at, okay, what are my deficiencies? Where can I grow or create different metrics around this? Because, like, are there perverse incentives to having metrics that measure this? Because if I'm doing this, does that create a incentive for the wrong behavior?
Mhm.
And that's, that just highlights biases that you have inherently. What your experience was, as you said, like, okay, an ERP system didn't work 20 years ago now, so that therefore that's happened, like that's going to recreate itself. I love using AI in those types of contexts to be able to sort of look at not only the structures that we're putting in place, but then be like, okay, be antagonistic, and then I
Mhm.
can go back and go, okay, how am I supplementing or creating or being challenged inside that space? And I think it's a real I think like Sam Altman even said that,
Mhm.
in terms of the the unexpected kind of growth for a sparring partner, like as
Mhm.
a depth of connection that
Mhm.
happens, has been unexpected in terms of how people are using it. And this is why
Yeah.
people feel like this cognitive connection with
Yeah.
with AI bots, because they're like, oh, they can make you better. You just need to know how to use them. And if people are using them in a way that's just like, okay, I'm going to ask it a question about, I don't know, World War II, and yeah,
Yeah.
it'll just give you facts. But it's like when you start to shape it with context and
Exactly.
your experience, and that's when it becomes really valuable, and to show your own biases. And that takes a level of self-knowledge, and
Mhm.
it can be a little bit brutal sometimes when you're like, oh yeah, okay, like particularly being ethical AI, like I'm
Yeah.
obviously like a big old greedy and people person and all that type of
Yeah.
stuff. And it's like, okay, so how are you driving this? How are you doing this? And I'm like, this is great to have something that is a safe place for me
Mhm.
to experiment with my thoughts, that creates more galvanizing arguments for that.
Absolutely. And I think that's, a really beautiful piece of creativity that comes with AI. I think, a lot of people still kind of stand on that corner of like, is this weird? Is this creepy? Is it not? And I think that's really what the modern organization is kind of going through. It reminds me of a dear friend of mine asked me this week if I would review her new AI app, which is for neurodivergent children, and they have an AI avatar that talks to the kids and then essentially gives the parents a certain readout. And she's kind of going through that. Obviously, that's a very vulnerable population, so there's lots of considerations there. But as I'm, working and testing this avatar, I had my hand like down like this because I was looking at something in my notes, and the avatar could see like from, hey, it looks like you might be a little upset about something. Do you want to, talk about it? And all of these different like high EQ points on that, I kept thinking like, why wouldn't we scale something maybe not as like soft and big feelings, but to enterprise levels that way, where we see these models being able to be trained on these responses that deal a lot with, I'm worried I'm going to lose my job. I'm worried that I'm going to be replaced. And having the option to kind of have, again, that environment where you're able to interact in that safer space. So you have kind of innovation, and then you have the ability to continue to be that adaptive leader that we all talk about by learning more about your processes and yourself.
Mm,
So yeah.
like it's a really good point. One thing that we love using AI for is linguistic analysis.
Oh
So
yeah.
taking in transcripts, taking in and be like, what's the underlying sentiment of how this, like, what's the,
Yeah.
like being able to kind of look at what conversations mean, what the context of the audience is, like all
Mhm.
those different types of things of like we do it between ourselves, and other collaborators that come on board. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
what's your leadership style? And like these tools kind of exist in isolation when you go, okay, what's your leadership style? And,
Mhm.
Myers-Briggs and all that type of stuff. And they're all still useful, but if you've actually got this layer that's like, how do you ensure that the team understands what their differences are,
Mhm.
where they might clash, what are building on them to make them stronger,
Mhm.
and coming with that with a level of cognizance and consideration. Yeah, it's a really exciting like sort of implementation for like AI is seeing how it can play out inside that
Yeah.
space, because a lot of people just go, oh, like they're using Copilot as a default tool. And it's like, oh, here's a kind of response. Those automated responses can be, cool.
Yeah.
But this is where the real value is also
Mhm.
in being able as a human to decipher these other other elements to the exchange. And I'll just quickly, and it's maybe a bit of a pivot, but kind of on
Oh,
the
yeah.
same thread.
Yeah.
Definitely worth reading the MIT Epoch study.
Okay.
This is a study that it came out end of last year, but kind of had a bit of airplay, uh, maybe around like
Yeah.
May time. Um, amazing sort of research into what are the skills of the future inside inside AI augmented organizations.
Mhm.
And so EPOC ultimately stands for empathy, presence, opinion, creativity, and hope. So as you go through and you kind of can map the capabilities for that. So like as
Mhm.
if you're an astronaut, what are the skills that you have that
Yeah.
are on that and you lean into those? And what the research was able to find is the more that you lean into those skills, basically the more resilient your role
Mhm.
becomes
Mhm.
on like long term. And that, like, we've been really inspired by that research, and we use it, on the regular to
Mhm.
embed this in practice inside organizations.
Yes.
What are the skill sets that are inside your workforce? What are the ones that are more human? How do you shape those? How do you develop a capability roadmap to lean into them? And then how would they affect, in a positive way, the business strategy? So it's a amazing sort of piece of research that everyone, I feel like, can take a little bit
Yeah.
to be like, okay, this is how, like, this is my role, these are my skills. How do I actually start driving in the direction of more human first skills?
Yes,
Because
I
that's what's
love
going to be more valuable.
Yes, of course. And, understanding how that actually translates into business outcome is going to really make that influence, right? We see those great leaders actually born right in that business analyst tier because they don't have a title where people have to do what they say, right? They look
Mhm.
to them because they have that influence and have that ability to understand. I think I love the epoch scales and things like that too, and personality assessments, because I think it really lets you be able to understand your teammates better or your community better. I mean, even some of my favorite workshops are when, we have accounting in the room and we have production in the room, and they're at odds of what they want for a business system, right? Accounting thinks they need this, production thinks they need this. And all of a sudden we hear kind of layer back the onion there and the whys behind that. And accounting had no idea that production had to do that, and vice versa. And then we see this kind of beautiful empathy born for being like, wow, I had no idea that was so hard for you. No wonder you want a new
Yeah,
system, right? And that, I think, can be replicated and really understood a lot of times with AI as well, and just kind of showing those gaps within the organization and assessing them. So
yeah, for sure.
I love that so much. I'm going to ask you this one. It's kind of a tough one. So, what happens when ethical AI slows down revenue?
Good question. Because it's a really interesting one. Oftentimes people will put ethics and sort of production, business
Mhm.
operations in contestation with each other, which just isn't, like, it
Yeah.
shouldn't be like that. But obviously the preface here is that it slows down revenue. Um, I'm guessing that this is a short-term implementation, because ethical AI in its essence, like, is about long-term sustainability of an
Mhm.
organization. So if you see a slowdown of revenue short term, like, this is the part of structuring your implementation to understand what may be short-term results for a longer term gain, right?
Mhm.
Because if you have to kind of reset a baseline, but you know that now you're developing a different element inside the structure, like, what I find really interesting is, we were talking before about people implementing AI and they get these quick wins. Okay, cool, we've removed this cost base.
Mm-hmm.
When that happens, what's the longer term impact to the people on the ground, the people in the organization that are seeing themselves now like at risk because
Mm-hmm.
they can be automated away? And so how does that work in terms of how any future AI implementation or rollout is going to happen? There's been a lot of interesting conversation inside this space for the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. I'm guessing that's not hit the news in the States, but anyway, like big things of like, okay, they made this team redundant.
Yeah.
They've had to rehire them all, and now it's this like kind of thing of like you've totally disincentivized the whole workforce
I,
to embed AI in
yeah.
any sort of effective way, because they're all like, now why would I do this? Why am I going to like embed it? And so you have this like impact on that front. But then also, if you're implementing AI, and we've seen this with Duolingo, we've seen it with Klarna, like it actually impacts on your stock performance if you're
Mm-hmm.
making cuts with AI, but not for a long-term kind of
Exactly.
goal and vision of, what does this mean for the vision of your organization? When there's been a lot more forgiveness inside the sort of the market for organizations that have, if they've made cuts, that they have been able to articulate what their vision is and why they're
Mm-hmm.
restructuring.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like whilst again, I don't think it's always the right thing to do. I think people are doing it at the moment very much as a knee-jerk reaction, and I think it shows a lack of vision.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're saying if ethical AI slows down revenue inside the short term, what you need to kind of also consider is what are the long-term impacts of doing that. If it means a disengagement of your workforce because you've done it unethically, if it means that you've maybe reduced the value of your market share because you've done it and it's now public, and but then
Mm-hmm.
also what's the risk to your leadership and the risk of leaders' legacies. That's the
Mm-hmm.
other thing, is that we will need to be standing by the decisions that we made right now for much longer. Like when we see these things happen, we're going to be like, in 5-10 years time, people are going to be like, oh yeah, we really messed up. We dropped the ball on that one. We did. And if you can come in with we took all these things into consideration. We did the best that we could, knowing what we could with the information that we had at the time. It's essentially the agile
Mm-hmm.
framing beginning of a
Mm-hmm.
retro. If you've done all your due diligence and understanding and putting some ethical frameworks in place, and that's where like I don't think that ethical AI ever realistically slows down revenue,
Right.
because it's more than
Totally.
that, right? Like it's more, if you're seeing it as a sort of softer kind of edge to it,
Yeah.
ethical AI is actually embedding itself into the value of an organization.
Yeah.
It shouldn't create any additional legwork. It shouldn't be done in that way, but it's I know that there's a lot of misunderstanding of what it actually could look like inside an organization.
Yes.
If you can back your decisions, I don't think that's a bad outcome.
And what would you say to maybe a CFO? Because I always find they're, the first to, try and cut or lean out these types of projects that says, you know what, we're going to get it moving and then we'll worry about ethics in phase two.
Well, the thing is that you're just introducing, like, what's the risk profile on how
Mhm.
it's run out? Like, okay, cool. You roll that out without the consideration of these things. Okay, worst case scenario. Let's write down what they're going to look like. Okay, so worst case scenario is that there's a breach of data. Okay, what do the fines look like? What does it? Okay, cool. So if you're now looking at the perception towards brand, what does that mean in terms of brand perception? What does that mean to your reputation? What does it mean to the CEO's reputation, who are
Mhm.
liable, look, who have a level of visibility as part of this decision making process? And I think the thing is that it's not impossible. It's just a different skill. And so
Mhm.
when you look at it as a skill that needs to be sort of honed, um, and this is where I came back to like ego.
Yeah.
Typically inside the C-suite, it's a hard bridge to gap, because what they have been rewarded for. And I can say this because I've also been C-suite.
Oh yeah.
Like
Same.
what you
Yeah.
get rewarded for, like
Yeah.
what you get rewarded for is this decisiveness and your ability to act quickly, but and as I said, it's a different world now. And so if you don't consider these thought processes, and Yeah, like as I said, it's just one of those things that I think will be interesting to see what things look like in 5 to 10 years if people don't put it in at a foundational level. It's not something you
Yeah.
can tack on at the end. So,
Exactly. Yeah, and I think it's, it's one of those things where like they so badly want to rush it in. And we know that story, right? We've read it many of times, especially in Australia. I don't know what the heck goes on down there sometimes with those implementations. I haven't heard of the
see, Commonwealth Bank.
yeah, I haven't heard of that, which I absolutely, me, I love a good story time. So I'll have to look into that. But, even with, the Deloitte Australia defrauding the entire government or whatever, which just went on down there, and the SAP failure. I mean, just watching that, I was like, the ego involved in this is insane. Like, not even
Yeah.
going to say, you know what? I apologize. I did all of that wrong. I should have, done X, Y, and Z. That's not even beginning to happen. It's like, I'll give you a 20% refund because I completely made up the entire thing that I gave a
Yeah.
government entity to shape policy around welfare,
Yeah.
which is absolutely insane. But
Yeah.
that's where we get these embarrassing breakdowns, right? That you have to, especially the bigger the business, the more visible that's going to be. We saw it with Queensland Health. We saw it with, even in New Zealand with their Air Force. All
Mhm.
of those different pieces, but mostly SAP seems to have a very bad track record in
Yeah.
Australia for those implementations. But
Yeah.
I think those pieces are like, how much risk are you willing to absorb when you
Yeah.
want to skip the critical fundamentals? Can you build a house on sand? For sure. Is it going to
Yeah.
fall to the ground? Most definitely. And was
Yeah.
that a
Yeah.
very expensive sand castle that you just
And
built?
And I think that this is like, I don't think it's exclusive to Australia, but I do think there's
Oh,
something,
sure. Yeah.
like, yeah, no, but I do think it's something also, there's a saying in Australia, she'll be right. Like, it's just like, oh, it'll work out in the end. And so, like, that's kind of, I can see that there's probably, like, as part of that structure around ethics, you could
Yeah.
be like, okay, what are the decisions, like that Deloitte government one was like,
That's
it's
insane.
been intense, like it's been very much everywhere, and like
Yeah.
the brand reputation to Deloitte and how that's
Oh,
impacted. The government is now like talking about making sure that there's only like Australian based businesses on like, it's been quite wild in terms of its implementation, and it could have been quite easily managed if there
oh,
was
for sure.
frameworks in place to make the call as to when it would be included. And I think the thing is that because people have come, and look, and I'm not trying to simplify it, but people have come from development, like looking at tech platform rollouts being a 5-year strategy.
Exactly.
Like, okay, this is our 5-year strategy. This is not the case in AI world.
Mm-mm.
Like, you cannot be baking things in for such long periods of time. And so you have to bake in the workforce elasticity to manage change. And so I think that when you're talking about these the kind of the thought of, okay, we'll just like bake ethics in later. It's
Yeah.
like, no, because it's in the day to day now.
Yes.
And if you don't
Yes.
have it baked in now, then it doesn't serve you at all.
Exactly.
Like it's not a thing that it's going to take 3 years to get a product up, and then that's when it gets put in. It's going to
Mhm.
be incremental. It's how does it get rolled in? Because the other sort of consideration set is like, what's your shadow infrastructure? What risk are you
Mhm.
absorbing by not having
Mhm.
an implemented AI strategy, and what your thoughts are around it? Because whether or not you like it or not, and you're saying before, a whole heap of people going, don't use Chat GPT or don't use that. That staff members are using it.
Oh,
If you
for
haven't
sure.
gone through the process of training them, then they're going to be putting confidential data inside systems. So it's just like one of those things of it is really a different skill set than what's happened, and analyzing risk, but then having the ethical layers on top. And
Mhm.
I said it's not insurmountable. It's how do you come to the table with a level of humility
Mhm.
and and a level of grace to understand that you don't know all the things, and then sit in the gray space and
Absolutely.
wrestle with it. And as I said, it's a different skill.
That's so beautifully said. The only thing I would add to it is, transparency. Like the more that we communicate with our teams, like, hey, you're doing our best to make sure that we get you the tools that you need. This is a new frontier for us, and we've created this feedback loop for you to continue to help us optimize. So many people don't take advantage of their most important data sets, which are the human beings that have been there for 20 years that manage
Exactly.
these processes. So,
Yeah. Oh,
and
gone.
yeah,
Okay,
I
I'm
was
back.
lost in
Bye.
the cloud. It was Deloitte. They were like, "She's
It's a
talking
lot.
to Deloitte
She
again.
cut it. Cut it.
Shut her off." No, 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 but,
Yeah.
in all
No. No. No.
seriousness,
Very much understand. Very much
yes.
understand.
This has been such an amazing conversation. I mean, you are absolutely brilliant. If our audience does have any questions about you or the company, what are the best ways to get in touch with you?
Um, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free, reach out on LinkedIn. TikTok is where Kat and I at Ethic AI we do basically try to get a video out a day, looking at the latest news. So we're really engaged with our community there. Our theory of change is really to develop as many active participants that are informed inside this space.
Mhm.
And so the more people that we're having conversations with, the better. If you look interested in training as well, we do have AI masterclasses, like where we're looking at career implementation, looking at defensible decisions, and then we also do consulting work if anyone's interested in that as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, like LinkedIn's probably the best. We've got a website, feel free, but LinkedIn or TikTok is typically MO.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for all of this great information you shared with us today. Thank you to the audience, to you for these amazing questions. As always, I will go back in and comment on every single one. Tag Kara here to give us some more insight as well to some of these great questions. I hope to see you guys next week. You know me, I always try and get bite size on the schedule, but my day job gets in the way. So I always like to make sure that we can have that access and time together. Just as a reminder, I do have the AI readiness group on solutions review. If you comment AI readiness here, I can send you all of the information, but we meet once a week just to go over and have these very similar conversations of what am I experiencing and how do I ensure that I make sure that I'm, setting myself up for success and my organization. So that's a cool thing to check out. And definitely go over to the TikTok community and follow these guys. Definitely some great stuff over there too. But
And
with that,
Kyla.
yeah,
And Kyla as well. Do Kyla as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
She's
I
awesome.
still like, I still just, and that is my mission, right? Is to kind of bring light to a lot of these things that essentially are, again, the underbelly, that SaaS mafia of these misunderstood pieces of these technology strategies that we don't really understand. I think that's where we get to a lot of these AI failures, is because we've just never talked about them before.
Yeah,
So
100%.
yeah,
And I said the kind of the behaviors that have been rewarded for so long have been that
used to it.
decisiveness and that ability. And so I said, it makes sense for that to be the culture that's pervaded. So I love your work inside, sort of truth to power inside the SaaS space. So definitely
Thank you.
one that I've absolutely loved watching.
Well, I appreciate that. Back at you. Well, with that, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to the audience, and we will see you next time.